The sky above Keth Prime burned red with the flames of dying ships. Council Leader Vex pressed his blue-scaled hand against the cracked viewing window of the command center. His people were losing the war, and he knew it. The Vorthak had come, 6 months ago. They were not like other enemies the Zilani had faced before. The Vorthak were machines, cold and calculating. They did not want territory or resources in the way organic beings understood such things. They wanted everything. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid would be consumed and turned into more ships, more weapons, more Vorthak. "Sir, we have lost another defense platform," reported Commander Crix from his station. His voice was steady, but Vex could see the fear in his large, dark eyes. "Platform 7 just went dark. That leaves us with only 2 orbital stations still fighting." Vex closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he saw the burning hulks of what had once been proud Zilani warships falling toward the planet's surface like dying stars. Each one represented hundreds of lives lost, families destroyed, hopes crushed under the mechanical advance of their enemy. "How many evacuation ships made it out?" Vex asked. 43 vessels, sir. Maybe 2 million people total." Crix paused, then added quietly, "Out of 12 billion. The number hit Vex like a physical blow. 2 million, survivors from a world of 12 billion. The Vorthak efficiency was terrifying in its completeness. They left nothing behind that could not serve their purpose. At that moment, Dr. Nira burst through the command center doors. She was an old female, her scales faded with age, but her eyes still held the bright curiosity that had made her the Confederation's best scientist. In her hands she carried something that made Vex's breath catch in his throat. It was a crystal, but not like any crystal found on Zilani worlds. This one seemed to contain light itself, swirling patterns of energy that moved like living things, trapped within its structure. The crystal was roughly the size of Vex's head, and it hummed with a power that made the air around it vibrate. "Council Leader," Dr. Nira said, breathing hard from her run. "I found it in the old ruins, the ones we discovered last year beneath the capital. This crystal, it's not from our world. It's not from any world we know." "What is it?" Vex asked, though part of him already suspected the answer would change everything. "It's a beacon," she replied, her voice filled with both excitement and fear. "The inscriptions around where I found it, they're in a language older than our recorded history, but I managed to translate some of it. This crystal was made by someone called the Guardians. They left it here as an emergency call for help." Vex stared at the crystal. Hope was a dangerous thing when you were facing extinction. But he found himself reaching for it anyway. "How does it work?" Dr. Nira set the crystal down on the command table. Up close, Vex could see that the swirling patterns inside weren't random. They formed shapes, images that seemed to tell a story of great battles and heroic rescues. According to the inscriptions, when activated, it sends out a call across the galaxy, a call that reaches those who are meant to answer. "And who is meant to answer?" Commander Crix asked, joining them at the table. "That's the thing," Dr. Nira said, her voice uncertain. "The inscriptions aren't clear about that. They mention something about the protectors and those who hear the call of the helpless. But there's no specific race or species mentioned." Outside, another explosion lit up the sky. The Vorthak were getting closer to the planet's surface. Soon they would begin the final phase of their harvest, and every living thing on Keth Prime would be processed into raw materials for their expansion. Vex looked at his people in the command center. They were all looking at him, waiting for his decision. These were good people, brave people who had given everything to defend their home. They deserved better than to die as fuel for alien machines. "What do we need to activate it?" he asked. "Power," Dr. Nira replied. "A lot of power, more than our emergency generators can provide. We would need to draw energy from the shield generators protecting this facility. That would leave us defenseless," Crix pointed out. "We're already defenseless," Vex said quietly. "Our fleet is gone. Our orbital platforms are falling. The evacuation ships that made it out are probably the only Zilani who will survive this day." He placed his hand on the crystal, feeling its warm surface pulse under his touch. At least, this gives us a chance. Dr. Nira began connecting the crystal to the facility's power systems. The process was delicate work, made more difficult by the explosions shaking the building every few minutes. As she worked, she explained what she had learned from the ancient inscriptions. The Guardians faced something like this before, she said, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. They called it the First Hunger, a machine intelligence that consumed everything in its path. They built these beacons and scattered them across the galaxy, hoping that someday someone would find them and use them when the hunger returned. You think the Vorthak are connected to this First Hunger? Vex asked. I don't know, she admitted. But the descriptions match. Cold machines that see organic life as inefficient, that consume entire worlds to fuel their growth. If they are the same, then maybe this beacon will bring the same kind of help the Guardians hoped for. The crystal began to glow brighter as Dr. Nira connected it to the power grid. The building's lights dimmed and Vex could hear the shield generators winding down. They were committed now. Power at 60% and rising, Dr. Nira reported. 70%, 80%. Through the window, Vex could see Vorthak landing craft descending toward the city. Their harvest had begun. 90%. Almost there. Dr. Nira's voice was tight with concentration. The crystal suddenly flared with brilliant light, too bright to look at directly. Energy rippled out from it in waves that Vex could feel in his bones. The air itself seemed to tear apart and reform around the beacon. Then something impossible happened. Space itself began to crack. Not metaphorically, but literally. Vex watched through the window as reality developed fractures, like broken glass spreading across the star field above their world. Through these cracks he could see something else. Somewhere else. Ships. Thousands of them. But these weren't Vorthak vessels with their cold, geometric designs. These ships were different, organic-looking despite being made of metal. They had a warmth to them, a sense of life and purpose that the Vorthak ships completely lacked. Dr. Nira, Vex said, his voice barely a whisper. What have we done? Admiral Jack Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the voice spoke inside his head. It wasn't his voice. It wasn't any human voice he had ever heard. It was alien, desperate, and filled with a sadness so deep it made his chest ache. The voice spoke in a language he didn't understand, but somehow he knew exactly what it meant. Help us. Please help us. They are killing everyone. Morrison dropped his coffee cup. The ceramic shattered on the floor of his quarters aboard the USS Liberty, but he barely noticed. Images flashed through his mind like a movie playing at high speed. Blue-skinned, people running in terror, ships falling from the sky in flames, children crying as mechanical monsters destroyed their world. He grabbed his communication device and called the bridge. Bridge, this is the Admiral. Are you getting anything strange on sensors? Sir, came the reply from Lieutenant Commander Pete Williams. We're getting reports from every ship in the fleet. Everyone's experiencing the same thing, some kind of signal that's going directly into people's heads. Morrison was already pulling on his uniform. I'm on my way up. Get me, Captain Hayes on the USS Falcon, and send a message to Earth Command immediately. When Morrison reached the bridge, he found his crew in chaos. Not the bad kind of chaos, but the kind that happens when good people want to help but don't know how. Every person on the bridge was talking at once, all of them trying to make sense of what they had experienced. Admiral, called out Navigation Officer Sarah Kim. I've got coordinates. The signal is coming from a star system about 37 light-years from Earth. System designation Keth 7. Sir, added Communications Officer Dan Murphy, Captain Hayes is reporting the same thing from the Falcon. Her entire crew felt it, too. She's requesting permission to investigate. Morrison looked at the main screen, which now showed a tactical display of human space. Red dots marked the locations of every human ship, military and civilian, within 100 light-years of Earth. There were a lot of red dots, and according to the incoming reports, every single one of them had received the same desperate message. Rachel Foster from the science vessel USS Discovery is requesting to speak with you, sir, Murphy reported. Put her through. Dr. Foster's face appeared on the screen. She was young for a xenobiologist, maybe 35, with short brown hair, and the kind of intense eyes that came from spending too much time looking through microscopes. But right now, those eyes were wide with excitement and concern. "Admiral Morrison," she said, "I've been analyzing the signal. It's not like any communication method we've ever encountered. It bypasses our hearing entirely and goes straight to the part of our brain that processes emotional responses." "What does that mean, Doctor?" "It means whoever sent this signal knows exactly how to push human psychological buttons. The signal is designed to trigger our protective instincts, our need to help those in danger. But here's the really interesting part. It only works on humans." Morrison frowned. "How do you know that?" "I had my assistant, Dr. Chang, who is part of our cultural exchange program with the Centauri colonies, monitor some of the Centauri crew members during the signal. They felt nothing. This message was specifically designed to call humans and only humans." Before Morrison could respond, Lieutenant Commander Williams called out from his station. "Admiral, you need to see this. I'm getting calls from everywhere. Military ships, cargo vessels, mining operations, colony ships, even some of the deep space research stations. Everyone wants to respond to that signal." Morrison looked at the tactical display again. The red dots were moving, all of them slowly, turning toward the same destination. It was like watching iron filings move toward a magnet. "Sir," came another voice, this one from the communications station. "I've got Captain Bill Rogers from the cargo ship Star Trader. He's requesting permission to retrofit his ship with weapons and join any rescue mission." "Tell him to stand by," Morrison replied, but even as he said it, he knew there would be no stopping this. The signal had done something to every human who heard it. It had awakened something deep inside them, something that demanded action. Over the next few hours, Morrison watched as the largest fleet in human history began to assemble. It wasn't an official military operation. Earth Command had given their blessing, but this was something bigger than military authority. This was humanity responding to a cry for help in the only way they knew how, with everything they had. Captain Lisa Hayes arrived first with her destroyer USS Falcon. She was a tough woman in her 40s, with gray streaks in her black hair and the kind of confidence that came from 20 years of commanding ships in dangerous space. When she materialized on the Liberty's bridge via hologram, her first words were simple. "Admiral, my crew is ready to go. When do we leave?" "Lisa," Morrison said, "we don't know what we're flying into. This could be a trap or a test or something we can't even imagine." Hayes nodded. "Could be. But those people, whoever they are, they're dying. The signal showed us that much. And if there's one thing I've learned in 20 years of service, it's that humans don't abandon people who need help." Morrison looked around his bridge. Every member of his crew was nodding in agreement. These were good people, trained soldiers who understood duty and honor. But this wasn't about duty. This was about something more basic, more human. "Dr. Foster," Morrison said, "you mentioned that this signal was designed specifically for humans. Any idea why?" The scientist appeared on the screen again. "I can only guess, Admiral, but based on the psychological profile of the signal, I think whoever sent it was looking for a species with strong pack instincts, high empathy levels, and a willingness to fight for others. In other words, they were looking for protectors. And they found us," Morrison said quietly. By the end of the day, the fleet had grown to over 3,000 ships. Some were military vessels like the Liberty and the Falcon. Others were cargo ships hastily fitted with whatever weapons their crews could find. There were colony ships that had turned around from their destinations to join the mission. Mining. Vessels had attached their industrial equipment to their hulls, turning plasma cutters and asteroid breakers into improvised weapons. Captain Tony Miller from the mining ship Rock Crusher had perhaps put it best when he called in to volunteer. "Admiral," he had said, "I've been breaking rocks for 15 years. But if someone needs help, I can break other things too." As the fleet prepared to jump to the Keth system, Morrison stood on his bridge and looked at the tactical display one more time. 3,000 ships carrying nearly 500,000 humans, all united by a single purpose. They had no idea what they would find when they arrived, but they were going anyway. "All ships," Morrison broadcast to the fleet. "This is Admiral Morrison. We don't know what we're going to find at our destination. We don't know if we can help, or if we'll even survive the attempt. But someone called for help and we're going to answer that call, because that's who we are. The response from 3,000 ships was immediate and unanimous. Ready to jump, Admiral. The human fleet arrived in the Keth system like an angry storm. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty as 3,000 ships dropped out of hyperspace almost at the same time. The sight that greeted them made every human in the fleet understand exactly why the desperate signal had reached across the galaxy to find them. The Keth system was dying. Massive Vorthak ships, each one the size of a small city, moved through space like mechanical sharks. They weren't just attacking the blue planet below, they were consuming it. Giant harvester vessels used enormous beam weapons to cut chunks out of the planet's surface, loading the raw material into their cargo holds. Smaller ships swarmed around the harvesters like metal insects, processing everything into useful components. "My God," whispered Captain Hayes from the USS Falcon. Her voice came through the fleet communication channel, and Morrison could hear the horror in it. "They're eating the planet." Navigation Officer Sarah Kim looked up from her console. "Admiral, I'm reading approximately 800 Vorthak vessels of various sizes. The largest ones are..." She paused, checking her readings again. "Sir, some of these ships are over 50 kilometers long." "What about the defenders?" Morrison asked. "I'm detecting maybe 30 ships that aren't Vorthak," reported Communications Officer Murphy. "They're badly damaged and falling back toward the planet. It looks like they're trying to protect evacuation sites." Morrison studied the tactical display. The surviving alien ships were tiny compared to the Vorthak vessels, but they kept fighting anyway. Even as he watched, one of the small defenders rammed itself into a Vorthak harvester, causing a brief explosion before both ships were destroyed. "Crave, little guys," muttered Lieutenant Commander Williams. "Sir," Murphy called out, "I'm getting a communication from one of the defending ships. They're trying to establish contact." "Put it through," Morrison ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was clearly alien, but the translation software managed to convert it into understandable English. The speaker sounded exhausted and desperate. "Unknown vessels, this is Commander Crix of the Zilani Defense Force. If you are here to help, please identify yourselves. If you are here to join the harvest, we will fight you with our last breath." Morrison stepped forward. "Commander Crix, this is Admiral Jack Morrison of the Earth Defense Fleet. We received your distress signal. We're here to help." There was a long pause. Then Crix's voice came back, filled with disbelief. "Earth? We have never heard of your species. How did you receive our beacon?" "That's a long story, Commander. Right now, we need to focus on stopping these Vorthak. Can you give us tactical information?" "Admiral Morrison," Crix replied, "I appreciate your courage, but you must understand what you face. The Vorthak have been expanding across the galaxy for centuries. They have consumed dozens of civilizations. Their ships are heavily armed and shielded. They do not negotiate, they do not retreat, and they do not show mercy." Morrison looked around his bridge. His crew was listening to every word, and he could see the determination in their faces growing stronger with each detail about the enemy. "Commander Crix," Morrison said, "you called for help and we came. Now let us show you what humans do when someone threatens innocent people." The Vorthak had noticed the arrival of the human fleet. Their ships began turning away from the planet, moving into attack formation. Morrison watched as the mechanical vessels arranged themselves with perfect precision, creating overlapping fields of fire. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," he broadcast to the human fleet. "You all know why we're here. Those people down there are dying, and these machines think they can just harvest an entire world like it's nothing more than a mining operation. I think they're about to learn something about humanity." Captain Hayes was the first to respond. "USS Falcon moving to attack position. Let's show these machines what real predators look like." The human fleet spread out across space in a formation that would have looked chaotic to any military strategist. But Morrison knew his people. They weren't following textbook tactics because this wasn't a textbook situation. Every captain in the fleet was responding to the same basic human instinct: protect those who can't protect themselves. Captain Ryan Scott commanded the cruiser USS Ranger. He had been a teacher before joining the military, and he approached the battle with the methodical patience of someone used to solving complex problems. His ship moved in close to one of the larger Vorthak vessels, using precise targeting to disable its weapon systems one by one. Captain Sue Phillips took a completely different approach. Her converted cargo ship Star Hauler didn't have military weapons, but it did have the industrial equipment she used for moving freight between star systems. She flew her ship straight at a Vorthak harvester and used her loading crane to literally grab onto the enemy vessel. "This is Phillips." Her voice crackled over the communication channel. "I've got a mechanical fish on the hook. Someone want to help me reel it in?" 3 other cargo ships immediately moved to assist her, their industrial equipment working together to tear apart the Vorthak ship like it was made of paper. The mining ship Rock Crusher, commanded by Captain Tony Miller, demonstrated why asteroid miners were not people you wanted to fight. Miller had spent years using plasma cutters and rock breakers to slice through the toughest materials in space. The Vorthak ships, for all their advanced technology, were still just metal and circuits. "Rock Crusher to all ships," Miller announced, as his plasma cutter sliced a Vorthak destroyer in half. "These machines might be smart, but they bleed just like rocks do." What happened next shocked both the Vorthak and the surviving Zilani defenders. The human fleet didn't just attack, they swarmed. Ships that had never been designed for combat became weapons of war. Colony ships used their prefabricated housing modules as kinetic projectiles. Research vessels turned their scientific equipment into improvised weapons. Even the medical ships joined the fight, using their rescue equipment to pull disabled Vorthak vessels apart. Commander Crix watched the battle from his damaged ship in complete amazement. "Admiral Morrison," he said over the communication channel, "your species fights like nothing we have ever seen. The Vorthak calculate victory based on superior firepower and numbers, but your ships, they fight like living things." Morrison smiled as he watched Captain Miller's mining ship use an asteroid as a club to smash a Vorthak cruiser. "Commander, humans have been fighting for survival since we lived in caves. We just learned how to do it in space." The Vorthak, for all their mechanical precision, had made a critical error in their calculations. They had analyzed the human ships and determined that most of them were not military vessels. They had not considered that humans could turn anything into a weapon when properly motivated. Dr. Foster, monitoring the battle from her science vessel, provided commentary that helped everyone understand what they were witnessing. The Vorthak fight like machines because that's what they are. Every decision is based on cold logic and calculated efficiency. But humans fight like humans. We adapt, we improvise, and we never give up when we're protecting something we care about. The tide of the battle turned in less than 2 hours. The Vorthak fleet, which had seemed invincible just moments before, was being systematically destroyed by an enemy they had completely underestimated. Morrison looked at his tactical display and realized something remarkable: they were winning. 72 hours after the first human ship arrived in the Keth system, the last Vorthak vessel was nothing more than scrap metal floating in space. Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of the USS Liberty, looking out at a sight that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Thousands of human ships moved through the system like busy worker bees, some towing damaged Zilani vessels to safety, others collecting survivors from the planet's surface. The mining ships had already begun clearing the orbital debris, while medical vessels worked around the clock to treat wounded Zilani refugees. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Crix through the communication system, "my government would like to formally invite you to our temporary command center on Keith Prime. Council Leader Vex wishes to meet the humans who answered our call." Morrison smiled. "Tell the Council Leader we would be honored to meet him." 2 hours later, Morrison found himself in what had once been the Zilani capital city. The buildings were damaged but still standing, and everywhere he looked he saw humans working alongside blue-skinned Zilani to clear rubble and set up temporary shelters. It was strange how quickly the two species had learned to work together, despite never having met before. Council Leader Vex was older than Morrison had expected, with deep lines around his large, dark eyes that spoke of years of worry and responsibility. When he saw Morrison approaching, he stood up from his desk and performed what looked like a formal bow. Admiral Morrison, Vex said through his translator device. I am Council Leader Vex of the Zilani Confederation. On behalf of my people, and all the people the Vorthak would have consumed if they had continued their expansion, I thank you. Morrison returned the bow. Council Leader, we were glad to help, but I have to ask, how did you know to call us? Your Dr. Nira mentioned something about an ancient beacon, but we've never had contact with your people before. Vex gestured for Morrison to sit down. Between them on the table was the crystal beacon that had started everything. It still glowed softly, though not as brightly as when it had been activated. The beacon was created by a race called the Guardians, Vex explained. They disappeared from the galaxy millions of years ago, but they left these devices behind. According to the inscriptions Dr. Nira translated, the Guardians faced a similar threat, machines that consumed everything in their path. The first hunger, Morrison said, remembering what Dr. Foster had told him. Yes, the Guardians created these beacons to call for help when the hunger returned, but they were very specific about what kind of help they wanted. The beacon was designed to reach only species with certain characteristics. Morrison leaned forward. What characteristics? Dr. Nira, who had been listening quietly from the corner of the room, spoke up. Species with strong protective instincts, the ability to work together under pressure, and the willingness to fight for strangers. The inscriptions called them the protectors of the small and helpless. The Guardians were looking for someone exactly like humans, Vex added. In all our history, no race has ever responded to a call for help the way yours did. Most species would have sent a small fleet, maybe a few dozen ships. You sent thousands. Morrison thought about that. Council Leader, what you have to understand is that the beacon didn't just reach our military. It reached every human within 100 light-years of Earth. When humans hear that someone needs help, especially someone who can't help themselves, we respond. It's just who we are. Over the following days, Morrison learned more about the galaxy the humans had just entered. The Vorthak had been a terror that had haunted civilizations for centuries. Entire species had gone extinct trying to fight them. Others had simply hidden, hoping the machines would pass them by. Captain Hayes joined Morrison for one of his meetings with the Zilani leadership. She had spent the last 2 days coordinating rescue operations and had some interesting observations. Admiral, she said, I've been talking to some of the other species that were hiding in this system. Refugees from worlds the Vorthak had already consumed. They keep asking me the same question. What question? They want to know if we're going to stay, if we're going to become their new protectors, or if we're just going to go home and leave them to face the next threat alone. Morrison had been thinking about the same thing. Word was already spreading across the galaxy about what had happened in the Keth system. Species that had lived in fear for generations were sending messages to Earth, asking for help with their own problems. What did you tell them? Morrison asked. Hayes smiled. I told them the truth, that humans don't abandon people who need help, but I also told them we're not interested in becoming galactic emperors. We want to help, but we won't rule. That evening, Morrison met with Captain Miller from the Rock Crusher. The mining captain had become something of a celebrity among the Zilani after his creative use of asteroids during the battle. Admiral, Miller said, I've been thinking about staying here for a while. These people need help rebuilding, and I know how to move heavy things around. Plus, some of the Zilani engineers have ideas about mining techniques that could revolutionize how we work. Miller wasn't the only one thinking about staying. Dr. Foster had already established a temporary research station to study Vorthak technology and learn more about the Guardian beacons. Captain Phillips was working with Zilani logistics experts to set up new trade routes. Even some of the military ships were volunteering for extended patrol duty. 3 weeks after the battle, Morrison received a message that changed everything. It came from the Galactic Council, a loose organization of species that had managed to survive the Vorthak threat by staying hidden. The message was simple. We formally request an audience with the human representatives. We wish to discuss establishing a mutual defense treaty. Morrison looked at the message and realized that humanity had just become a major power in galactic politics. whether they wanted to or not. That night, he stood on the observation deck of the Liberty again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Council Leader Vex had joined him, along with Commander Crix and Dr. Nira. They were all looking out at the stars, thinking about the future. "Admiral Morrison," Vex said quietly, "my people have a saying. When you call into the darkness, you never know what will answer. We called for help and we received more than we ever dreamed possible." Morrison nodded. "Council Leader, humans have a saying too. Be careful what you wish for because you might get it. You asked for help, and you got Earth's entire fleet." "And we are grateful," Vex replied. "But I am curious about something. Now that you know about the galaxy, about all the species who need protection, what will humanity do?" Morrison thought about that question for a long time. Finally, he answered, "We'll do what we've always done. We'll help those who need it, protect those who can't protect themselves, and try to make the galaxy a little bit safer for everyone. The Guardians were looking for protectors, and they found us. I guess we better live up to the job." 6 months. Later, the first human embassy opened on New Zelani, the Confederation's new capital world. The beacon still sat in a place of honor, no longer glowing, but still warm to the touch. It served as a reminder that sometimes when you call for help in the darkness, the answer you get is exactly what you need. And across the galaxy, other species slept a little easier, knowing that somewhere out there, the humans were listening.